So welcome back to the Devoted Coffee Co. YouTube channel. Today's video will be part one of a two-part series on specialty coffee. In this first part, I wanted to focus on what is coffee, because I feel like many of us don't actually know what coffee is. So let's get into it. We colloquially call coffee beans, but coffee is not a bean at all. It comes from the Coffea arabica tree. This tree develops a fruit like a cherry. On the outside of the fruit is the skin, and underneath that is the pulp or the mucilage. This is a fleshy fruit, and it's similar to the consistency of a grape. Now it is edible and has been described as a sweet honeydew or a very ripe honeydew, and underneath that are two more layers of protective skin, the first being the silver skin and the second is the parchment. Then finally you get to the bean. Now it's only called the bean because it looks like one, but it is actually the seed of this amazing fruit from the Coffea arabica tree. So now that we've cleared up the common misconception that coffee is a bean, and we know that it's actually the seed of a fruit, let's talk about how it actually gets into your cup. First, the coffee has to be planted. Like any agricultural product, there has to be time and care taken into the soil, tending to the soil, preparing the soil, planting the seed, then waiting and waiting, and finally you get a sapling. Now what people don't realize is that this sapling is just the beginning of a tree, but usually it is grown elsewhere and bought by a coffee plantation. The coffee plantation then plants the sapling on their land, but still has to wait another 2 to 5 years before a coffee tree actually begins to produce fruit. Now that the tree is finally starting to produce fruit 2 to 5 years later, it has to be picked, it has to be harvested. There are many different ways to harvest coffee cherry, and we will talk more about that in part 2. Make sure you don't miss it. You want to like and subscribe to this video. I would appreciate that. That helps me with the algorithm and all of that good stuff, and it will help you see part 2 of this. So after the cherries are harvested, what we have is a basket full of these coffee fruits, cherries. Now those cherries are taken and they have to be processed because the bean is still under all those layers of skin and pulp, mucilage, parchment, silver skin, all of that. There's the bean. So there are different processing methods as well: the wet process, the dry or natural process, and the honey process. These are the 3 common types. I will most likely be making a video on processing as well. After processing, which is sometimes called depulping, the coffee has to be dried. So it's dried for a certain amount of time. It can vary depending on conditions and the type of coffee that's being dried. It goes to a place where they rest it for 30 to 60 days. After that, it is hulled. This is where they remove that parchment layer, and then it is graded, and finally it is packaged in jute bags of 60 or 69 kilogram jute bags, which is 132, 152 pounds. Coffee is then ready for export. So at this point, you have the green coffee bean in the jute bags ready for export. We are about halfway through the process of these green coffee beans finding their way into your cup. It's important to note as well that most small farms don't have the ability to process, grade, and export coffee on their own. That is why co-ops are very important to small farms, and we'll talk more about that in the specialty coffee video part 2. After exporting, coffee is bought by big companies. These big companies are called coffee importers. These importers bring in and store all of the green coffee beans that have been exported from the producing countries. They then sell those green coffee beans to roasters. At this point, the roaster roasts the coffee, and sometimes you're seeing more and more these days, roasters have their own coffee shops. This cuts out one step of the coffee chain and actually saves a lot of money. You see more and more businesses, coffee businesses, going towards that model. However, traditionally, those roasters would roast the coffee, put them in 5-pound bags, and send those 5-pound bags to the coffee shops, roasted. And then it would be ground and made into your cup of coffee. So as you can tell from this journey, there is a lot more that goes into coffee than a lot of us think about on a daily basis when we're having our morning cup of coffee. At each step in the process, it could have gone wrong, and your coffee would be ruined. And it's nothing short of a mini miracle that you can wake up and have a delicious cup of coffee every morning. It is the sum of a huge amount of effort put forth by a lot of people. It's a good decaf.